Rolling.
Hey, okay, welcome everybody. Right now I want to welcome to the podium Gregory James Barone. He's not only a family friend, he's a attorney, he's also a bit of a Renaissance man. Graduate of Georgetown Law School, admitted to 4 bars, and has had many endeavors in his life. He used to be, and now he's going to talk to you about being a sports agent and the role of sports law and what it's like to represent athletes and clients. So, look now.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here and be able to talk with you, share a little bit with you my knowledge and experience as being a sports lawyer. Thank you to Michael and, of course, his father, Joe, and mother, Emily. I've known them for a long time. They really have done a marvelous job of presenting a lot of different interesting courses to people. I hope you find this one of them. Probably the most interesting thing about the term sports lawyer is that it's hard to define. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I came to know about sports law, as it's referred to, and what it means. A lot of you may use Wikipedia, and I suggest that when it comes to sports law, if you want to know something about it, you might even just use Google and use Wikipedia, because it can give you a lot of interesting information. Wikipedia has, under sports law, a definition that it is an umbrella term used to describe legal issues at work in the world of both amateur and professional sports. This course today is not about either professional sports or amateur sports, but all sports worldwide. I want you to, if you would, take a look at from time to time, the outline that's been included in the materials, which I began to develop about 20-some odd years ago, because it really tries to encompass all the various things that sports law entails. First of all, let me take you back to where I kind of began. I've been an athlete all my life. I've been involved in athletics, and when I went to law school, I thought I wanted to be involved in sports and be maybe a sports agent. I never knew until years later, when I was involved with the Entertainment Arts and Sports Law Committee of the Florida Bar, while practicing in Florida back in the mid-'80s, that I had unknowingly, unwittingly, become a professional athlete when I was 14 years old, at least technically. What had happened was, while I was living in Florida, involved in this committee, I had been a member of Innisbrook Golf Club and Resort. Played a lot of tennis, and one day I was at a tennis tournament, a USTA tournament, and noticed this very attractive young little blonde playing very well, and met her parents, and I was talking to them about how great she looked, and how they really did a great job of equipping her well. And so we don't provide all those rackets and all those shoes and everything you see. They're given to her by Reebok and by Alessi, very expensive clothing. And I thought, oh, that's great. They're kind of recruiting her for when she turns pro, because she looked like she was going to become a pro. That got me to thinking, can she do that? She's an amateur playing an amateur tournament. So that's when I got very involved with this. We call it, in Florida, we call it the EASL Committee, Entertainment Arts and Sports Law Committee, that used to meet in Miami for lunches every couple of months. I lived in Palm Harbor near Tampa, and I would get on a plane and fly down there and have lunch and meet with everyone. They were kind of amazed that I would do that, but I was that interested in knowing more about where that committee was going, and they made me the chairman of the subcommittee on sports, and so So then from that experience with that tennis player, that forced me to want to have a symposium about sports role in amateur athletics and eligibility and what was going on with rules and regulations with the NCAA, the International Olympic Committee, etc. So we had a symposium, and I wrote an article. And in the course of writing the article, I learned many things. One of which was that tennis player was unequivocally a professional, and that I had become a professional at the age of 14 without knowing it. And here's the background of it. This sports world outline that you have in the materials is only a broad spectrum. Today I'll be talking in a macro way, very broad terms. We're not going to get too specific about too many things, but I will cite some things for you. And one of them is really what you'll see in my article that I wrote in 1988 called Advising the Amateur Athlete to Preserve Eligibility. This all came about because I learned that when you look at NCAA regulations, the policy behind it is that all students will be treated equally. Nobody will be given special consideration. So the NCAA, which is the major governing body of all intercollegiate sports, is very strict about what they'll allow their athletes, to take from commercial sponsors and what they'll allow them to do. I suggest that if you want to get a really good grip on eligibility, that you start with that 3-page article that I wrote back then, because it lays out the regulatory structure of international competitions, interscholastic competitions, and of course intercollegiate competitions. Let me talk about for a moment what happened with the tennis player and why she was a problem, or her situation was a problem. What she was doing was she was taking clothing, rackets, and things from these sponsors at a time when she was competing as an amateur, not taking them with thinking that she was becoming a professional, because she had no clue, her parents had no clue, that the whole purpose of amateur athletics is to not take anything of value, not to be awarded either money or anything else that might make you a professional. And what you will see from the material from that article is that once she took those items, she actually violated an NCAA regulation. And that regulation essentially not only made her a professional athlete for having taken something of value, but that could have, and in fact would have, prevented her from competing in some international competitions. So to go back for a moment, go back to why I got involved with this, it was all because I saw that there was a potential that she wasn't going to be able to play in college, wasn't going to be able to get a college scholarship. In fact, she had been already recruited by Stanford, University of North Carolina, and had they known that she was getting these things, they would not have been able to give her a scholarship legitimately. We all know as lawyers that to a great extent things are not black and white. It's how you interpret them. However, I will warn you that if you think the NCAA is going to be any easier or lighter than any courts you've been in, any judges you've been before, think again. Particularly if any of you are familiar with the news recently of what's happened with the football coach at Ohio State University, who was found the players were not found to have violated a regulation that essentially he was criticized for not revealing them having violated. But the press held him responsible, the NCAA pressured him, and he resigned as coach of Ohio State University football team. So the ramifications of our actions as lawyers can be very broad, very deep, very devastating. To look at the article that I wrote back in in 1988 for the Entertainment Arts and Sports Law section of the Florida Bar. That addresses what Ron Rowan, then the General Counsel of the United States Olympic Committee, said. He told me that lawyers need to know how and when to get involved. And for a lot of you, you may be interested in becoming even an agent for a professional athlete, or helping a family member, somebody you know who's a friend. Some of you might haven't been involved with your schools or with coaching a little league team. Be very wary. The 3 pages of this article should tell you enough and steer you enough to sources of information, which hopefully will prevent somebody from losing their eligibility. What an amateur is kind of a curiosity for a lot of people. Recently, in March, I spent the day at Harvard Law School at a symposium on amateurism. If I were to just be here today to talk with you for 2 hours about what went on that one day, I don't think I could fit it all in today. In fact, when you do your criticisms or your evaluations of this course later, if you would, convey to Marino Legal if you have a specific interest in any topic that comes up today, such as the NCAA and its regulations, or professional football, representing a professional golfer, which I've done. One of the things I'd like to do is go over some definitions, so we get a little bit of a framework of what we're dealing with. When we talk about international competitions, I know that everyone thinks that it's only the Olympic Games and the Olympics. It's not. It's all sorts of international, Pan American Games, Paralympics, and the world's largest sport, which is not American football, which is probably the most revenue-gaining sport, but soccer. And there's more and more international soccer competitions. So there is a framework that has to be always regarded, and that's what's called the national governing body of the sport. Back in 1978, the Amateur Sports Act was passed, and what that did was essentially coordinate amateur sports jurisdiction under the national governing bodies of each respective sport nationwide. We have essentially every sport has a national governing body. That national governing body, take as an example for soccer, will determine which players are eligible to compete in international competitions. Now, those competitions can be under the regulations of an international governing body or an international competition such as the World Cup, but they don't have to be. So each level of competition has a ramification of whether it's within a regulatory framework or it's on its own. For example, would be the National Rugby, I think it's called the American Rugby Association, something like that. That's really not under any regulatory jurisdiction. However, it's got a national governing body. If you want to compete in a rugby tournament in this country, you have to qualify under the national governing body to actually compete in their competition. It doesn't mean that the international rules will apply. So looking at just collegiate competition, we would think it's all the NCAA, but it's not just the NCAA. And an example that's pointed out in that article is that when you have an athlete who is going to be competing in two different sports in college. Perfect example would be a fellow by the name of Bo Jackson. Any of you know who Bo Jackson was? Anybody old enough to know? Okay, Bo Jackson played football at Auburn University and a national championship team in the late 80s. He's an extraordinary football player, but he's also a baseball player. And he happened to be playing for a Southeastern Conference school. And unbeknownst to Bo, after the football season ended and he was going to be considered to be drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right near where I live, he accepted a plane ticket to go down to Tampa and get a physical to see what kind of shape he was in. It's a huge mistake. As soon as he accepted the plane ticket, he became a professional, not under NCAA rules. He became a professional under the Southeastern Conference rules. And the reason is that any conference, actually any organization that sends down from the NCAA, within the NCAA, we'll just talk about conferences alone. Each conference can make a stricter regulation than the NCAA's regulation. Now, had Bo Jackson been in the Atlantic Coastal Conference, he would not have become a professional. So what happened was, when Bo took his physical and the Southeastern Conference said you're a professional, the NCAA didn't tell him he was a professional, but the SEC said if you become a professional in one sport, you're a professional in all sports in our conference. And so therefore, by going to Tampa, accepting a plane ticket to get a physical, the SEC declared him professional. He couldn't play baseball in the spring, and he had no chance at a baseball professional contract at that point. Now, Bo Jackson's situation is rather interesting because some of you may want to become agents. Is there anybody here who has represented an athlete, amateur or professional? Been involved? Is there anyone here who's really looking to become a professional sports agent? So I'll tell you a little, I've been around many agents, I've been around a lot of people who would like to actually represent athletes. They think it's very glamorous, and it can be at times. It can also be very difficult representing elite athletes. And I met Bo Jackson's agent at a seminar where he told me he was a tax attorney in Mobile, Alabama. He's sitting in his office and he gets his phone. His secretary called down and said, "Richard, there's Bo Jackson on the phone for you." He thought, "Oh," picks up the phone. I said, "Yeah, my name's Bo Jackson, and you represented my roommate's brother in a tax matter, and I'm going to have a real tax problem, so I'm going to be drafted very soon. To say the least, he was going to be the #1 draft in all of the drafts. And I want to see you." So, of course, Richard was completely shocked. And he said, "But I just want to tell you in advance that I want you to represent me on an hourly basis. Would you be interested in that?" And I said, "Certainly." Bo Jackson was no idiot. Because back then, and I was a registered NFL agent, at that time, you were limited to, you could charge up to 5% of the contract amount that the player signed for with the team. And that wasn't what Richard was interested in. Richard did see Bo. They got along well. Bo told him, "I don't need some guy to sit down and just negotiate a contract for me and take 5% of several millions of dollars. Instead," he said, "I'm going to have these tax problems, and I really need somebody to really help me with that." And Richard said to him, "Well, I'll be happy to help you with all of it. I'll charge you on an hourly basis to negotiate your contract each and every part of the way. Well, when it comes to your endorsements, I'd like part of that." Bo had no problem with that. So Richard went from an average tax lawyer, I wouldn't call him average, a very good tax lawyer, but in terms of making a living in Mobile, Alabama, he wasn't wealthy. Well, he got 15%, I believe, of all of Bo's endorsements, which ran tens of millions of dollars. Doesn't take long to figure out what happened to Richard. Within about 3 years, Richard had a half a dozen other players, and that's how he became a sports agent, just like that. So it can happen to any of you, and other things can happen to you, like a friend calling you and saying, "Gee, my daughter wants to play soccer in college. She's just been offered a couple of scholarships." As my article will tell you, that creates problems. When when you have amateur status, it has to be retained in all respects. And those respects are things that I tried to make other lawyers in Florida aware of in this article, and then later this article was republished nationally, and hopefully other lawyers learned. I had a friend whose daughter, in fact, was offered a scholarship at a major Division I school, and another one offered it, same thing. He called the coach at the other school where he wanted her to go to school and said, look, I want my daughter to get the best coaching, but what will you do for my daughter? What extra will you do that the other won't do? And if all of you are picking up the drift of what I've told you so far in 20 minutes, hopefully probably isn't that much, she became a professional athlete as soon as he did that. Because he was negotiating in her behalf to get something that other girls who were going to play soccer for that institution weren't going to get. And unequivocally under NCAA rules, she was a professional. She went on to become an All-American, and she did not play in international competition, but almost did. What I found so fascinating was that he had no intent of doing anything to his daughter. And you as lawyers may have no intent to do anything to an amateur who you may come across who decides wants to go to X university, but they're not giving as good a scholarship. And so somebody asks you, would you give a call or be their lawyer? One of the reasons why we're here today, why I wrote all this, you need to know how to get involved, where to get involved, to what extent to get involved, what arena you're in, what regulations apply. And not only, for example, not just that you're in the NCAA or that this particular person is involved in a conference that may have certain overlay rules, but you also have to look at international rules, because that person may end up wanting to be on an international team. And that did, in fact, happen years later. I can tell you, anybody here know about the Jeremy Bloom case? Ever heard of Jeremy Bloom? Famous freestyle skier, went to the University of Colorado. If you want to, in the materials, I don't have it here in the materials, but I'll just tell you that Jeremy Bloom was a phenomenal freestyle skier, and he got a lot of sponsors who got behind him to help him be able to train. It takes a lot of time and effort to do that. He was supported by it. And he went on and he won Olympic medals as a freestyle skier. And he was at the University of Colorado, and he was a great split end, and he wanted to play football at the University of Colorado. And if you look up the case of Bloom versus the NCAA, what you'll find out is Jeremy Bloom unknowingly had become a professional athlete in the eyes of the NCAA. And he became a professional athlete because as a freestyle skier, he accepted all this sponsorship money, and other students couldn't get that sponsorship money. Well, his argument was that would have to do with skiing, not football. And the University of Colorado, of course, wanted to see him come and play. But the NCAA did not allow him to play. And if you're interested in the Jeremy Bloom case, I suggest you read a law review article that I think is wonderfully done by Laura Friedman. It's in the Fordham Intellectual Property, Media, and Entertainment Law Journal. It was written in 2003, entitled Pay or Play, the Jeremy Bloom Decision and the NCAA Amateurism Rules. Bottom line is that Jeremy Bloom, who I saw a couple of months ago, was not permitted to play football, all because they said he had to have given up his sponsorship from all these organizations that led him to win medals for our country. So amateurism is really what we're kind of talking about today, and professionalism. When are you a professional? When are you an amateur? The definitions of what an amateur is and what a professional is vary. And in fact, there are arguments today, and probably the biggest argument today, is that many of the football players, college football players, and college basketball players, really are somewhere between amateurs and professionals. And it's one of the things that I'd like to get into a little bit later, but suffice